Hey guys, Mulligan here, and welcome to part 2 of my Omens of the Past preview, where we'll be talking about the cards from the next Eternal set that have been spoiled for the week ending June 30th, 2017. Again, since you guys are seeing this on Monday, it will probably be mere hours until another set of cards are spoiled, since that's exactly what happened last week. Also, as usual, I will only be talking about the cards as far as their use in Constructed, unless the card is absolutely terrible in that format, in which case I will briefly talk about its potential use in Draft. Let's jump into it. So the first card we're going to be looking at is Shatterglass Mage. This is a 5 power, 5/3, requiring 1 fire influence and 1 time influence to play. It has Overwhelm and Warp. When it comes into play, it kills an enemy attachment. So for those that don't know, Warp is the Praxis mechanic. It states that the card is revealed to its owner when it is on the top of its owner's deck, and this card may be played as if it's in hand. So they took the best of both worlds in Dusthoof Brawler, a card that sees fringe play in Draft, and Furnace Mage, a card that sees fringe play on the Constructed ladder, but is more popular as a sideboard card for tournaments. I'm not sold on this being played over Furnace Mage in aggro or mid-range practice decks. Warp is a pretty strong mechanic, but my biggest concern is that in practice, you're going to have awkward turns where you have the option to warp something into play, but even if it gives you card advantage, it's still not the best play for the situation you're in. You can get a 3-for-1 if you manage to warp this card into play, kill an attachment, and trade with another unit, but that will be extremely rare in my opinion. Now, one thing to note is that this is more splashable than Furnace Mage for certain decks. I don't know about you guys, but in my experience, it's been easier to hit 1 influence for 2 different colors than 2 influence for the same color in this game, especially when I'm playing 3-faction decks. A deck like Ikaria Gold has run a single Furnace Mage in the past as a flex slot, so maybe Shatterglass Mage could be the replacement. This could also make Divining Rod playable in Praxis, but it would be nice if Time or Fire got Overwhelm units costing 2 and 4, since that's the closest battle skill that Praxis can use consistently with the units we have now. A 2-drop with Overwhelm would have to be able to buff itself, similar to Pyro Knight though. Otherwise it's not worth it. That style of mid-range deck would probably still be okay without those anyway, since Time has Sandstorm Titan and Fire has Rakano Outlaw, if nothing else. If there aren't any better 5-drops that get printed for Praxis, then this ends up competing with Twin Brood Sauropod, which is going to be tough. Twin Brood provides just as much, if not even more value than Shatterglass Mage does. Champion of Impulse indirectly protects this card, since if you attack with Champion on 4 power, then you drop this post-combat, and the only way to respond to it is with a fast spell removal, but that runs aplenty in the current metagame with Torch and Annihilate. Not to mention Vanquish gets this too, but I don't think the Vanquish player feels good killing a 5/3 when they could have hit something better, like a Sandstorm Titan. Also, attacking with Champion of Impulse can get awkward depending on the board state. This is a good card in its own right. It's even splashable enough to possibly fit into some 3-color decks, maybe Firetime Shadow Killers, or Firetime Primal Midrange, or Clockroaches. As far as this actually getting play and Constructed, we'll see. It might not, though, due to the typo in the card text. Direwolf, why you do this? Next card we're going to be talking about is Hipshot. This is a 3-power spell, costing 1 fire influence, requiring 1 fire influence to play, has Warp, and you deal 2 damage. So this was one of the cards that got revealed on Discord by Scarlatch way back before the new set was officially announced and spoiler season started. I will confess that I wanted to wait before covering it because I wanted to actually see the official card image, text, art, and all. Very unfortunate that this turned out to be a regular spell though, and not a fast spell, although we all pretty much knew anyway. I think people are going to largely avoid the card in Constructed because of it though. This would have had so much potential if it was a fast spell. I don't even think the spell heavy Skycrack burn decks will necessarily need this card, since almost every other burn spell in the game is better than this. Even in draft, this competes with Alchemical Blast, and even that card sees fringe play there. At best, it's a role filler in draft if you're in desperate need of removal. Next card we're going to be talking about is Barracks Familiar. This is a 3-power 1/1 unit requiring 1-time influence to play. It has flying and warp, and it also has +1 maximum power while it's in play. So this is the other card that I was waiting to cover for the exact same reasons as Hipshot. Both got revealed on Discord at the same time. I'm happy that Time is getting more cards in an attempt to make a ramp deck more consistent, but the more I think about this card, the more I ask myself, why don't I just play Secret Pages instead? Yes, I get a 1/1 body, but the main reason you would play this is for the extra max power, and in order to take advantage of that, you'd need to keep this thing alive if you are playing it on turn 3. That makes this card a bad blocker that you also hope doesn't get removed by something like Torch or Vara's Favor. Warp does help that fact, though, to an extent. But I think the only way this card sees any real play in Constructed is if we get enough support for a ramp deck that's dinosaur themed. Aevasaur Patriarch busts this card thanks to the dinosaur tag, if it lives to see that day. And of course you're going to be playing the best units the dinosaur tribe has to offer in Twin Brute Sauropod, Predatory Carnosaur, and maybe even Scaly Gruen. Outside of that, I can't see this finding a slot in any other ramp deck when Secret Pages exists. Guaranteed ramp is better than conditional ramp on a 1/1 body, in my opinion. It is possible we get more dinosaur tribal support, but honestly, it would have to be an early game card that could protect this card via some type of stat buff or Aegis, I feel. Next card is Outlands Brute. This is a 4-power 4/1 requiring 2 fire influence to play. It has charge and warp. When an enemy spell is played directly on Outlands Brute, deal 2 damage to that player. So there's a lot I want to say about this card. It's clearly for aggressive decks, particularly ones that play early units on the first 3 turns with high attack stats to do as much damage as possible from the very first turn. I love the art, but I think overall the card is below average. Charge and warp can be pretty dangerous when paired together, so I'm kind of glad this isn't too powerful. It's a decent top deck if both you and your opponent are in top deck mode and the board is empty. It also allows aggro to cycle through their deck a bit faster thanks to warp. You could argue that you can just play more copies of the actual card you want instead of this, but that's deck dependent. It does get some value if it gets directly targeted by an enemy spell, but the 2 damage is only really relevant if you're playing this in aggro and you've managed to damage your opponent enough to where this would matter. Then again, every point of damage matters when you're playing aggro. It's also fairly easy to block unless you are in the top deck situation I just mentioned earlier. I think Mono Fire aggro benefits the most from this card since currently the 4-drop slot is pretty bare as far as units go. The only decent one is Rebel Illuminator. And I doubt Praxis Tokens wants this since on turn 4, Praxis Tokens would rather play Xenon Obelisk or flood the board even more with Marison's Disciple. They would even run Sandstorm Titan over this because Praxis Tokens is not built to be a super aggressive deck, bent on killing the opponent fast, although they are capable of doing so with access to fire cards like Rally and burn spells like Torch and Obliterate. Despite this card being a benefit to the super aggressive decks I mentioned earlier, Stone Scar does not need this card since they have access to Bandit Queen and Impending Doom. Every Stone Scar aggro deck benefits more from at least one of those 2 4-drops, and some run both. I'd rather have a 5/5 with evasion and a largely irrelevant drawback, or one that busts my entire board with quick draw and an attack increase. As far as Rakano goes, I doubt Rakano Plate needs this. The 4-drop slot is bare outside of Hammer of Might, but Outlands Brute doesn't exactly fit the deck's game plan. Now, this might have a chance in something like Rakano Rally or the Rakano Burn deck that I got from Unearthly a few seasons ago, since the original deck list runs 0 cards costing 4. I won't really touch on something like Skycrag aggro since I admittedly don't have any experience with the deck, but it might be tough for this card to see play there as it would compete with Alpine Tracker. Overall, I think if this is going to see a bunch of play in a wider variety of aggro decks, it's going to need some help from either this upcoming set or a future one. Now, the next card I'll be talking about is Play to Goliath. This is a 6 power 7/5 requiring 2-time influence to play. It has Overwhelm and Warp. So this card in itself is not terrible, but as far as constructed goes, there are other 6-drops that seriously outclass this for any decks running time. The most direct comparison is Predatory Carnosaur, who I'll go ahead and say is strictly better. Killer immediately affects the board for you versus warping a 7/5 into play, and the triple time influence doesn't matter as much when you're playing the best power fixing color in the game. The fact that Carnosaur is also a dinosaur means that it will be hard for Goliath to even find a place in a tribal deck. You can't really afford to play a ton of 6-drops, and they all have to have huge impact if you're paying that much for one. 5 health also hurts since 5/5 is a popular stat line in nearly every mid-range deck in the current metagame right now. Mystic Ascendant also gets a mention as a high impact unit, but honestly that's a 7-drop, not a 6-drop. Still way better than this card though. This is a solid draft pick though, as it seems this card was designed with draft in mind. It still won't get picked over Predatory Carnosaur, but I like it better than, say, Towering Terrazon. Of course, it will all depend on what you need for your deck if both end up in the same pack, a 5-drop beater or a 6-drop beater. Next card I'll be talking about is Skyward Seer. This is a 4 power 1/3 requiring 2 primal influence to play. It has Spark. You draw a flying unit of your choice from your deck when Spark is activated. So we finally see what the mechanic for Skycrag is. Spark reads that cards with Spark gain additional effects when played after the enemy player has been dealt damage that turn. I quickly want to say that Spark definitely fits the identity that Direwolf seems to be going for with Skycrag, but it feels somewhat like Infiltrate, except not terrible, since it's not limited to a specific unit dealing damage. You can use any source to deal damage to the enemy player. Now, I do admit that I was on the hype train a bit for this new mechanic. I thought you could actually continue to trigger Spark after a unit with Spark was already in play, but I failed to realize those 2 little words in the description of the mechanic, when played. I literally had to go back and reevaluate both this card and the next 2 cards on this list because of this. This effect is still extremely powerful, and because of that, I think its stat line is more than fair, being vulnerable to all sorts of counterplay like Torch, Suffocate, and Annihilate. 3 damage isn't too hard to do for most decks by turn 4. But let's talk about the decks this could fit in. It looks like aggressive Huru decks finally got the 4-drop they were looking for, as Huru Flyers is the most obvious deck that sticks out. Attacking with Silverwing Familiar on turn 4, then dropping this end of turn to get another flying unit out of your deck is pretty strong. Serpent Mount definitely won't be played in Constructed now. It's possible that Huru Control, and by extension Time Justice Primal Control, the non-Chalice version likely, will want this card as well, since being able to fetch one of your big dragons or a flyer that deals with a problematic threat is very strong. But we might need an early game sticky flying unit with an ability that complements control decks. We do have Borderlands Waykeeper, but with needing to pay 4 to give her flying if she needs the evasion to deal damage, that makes things awkward with this card since you couldn't get the Spark ability off until turn 5. We'll have to see if Omens of the Past gives us anything else that fits the description. Skycrag can obviously take advantage of this card the easiest with all the direct damage they have access to. It's their mechanic after all. The current crop of aggro decks can use it to fetch Soulfire Drake or Whispering Wind to pitch their dead cards. The stat line is not aggressive at all though, and I think it will likely be a 4-drop that complements Alpine Tracker, if Seared is played at all there. This also has a chance to shine in the more spell-heavy burn decks if you're looking to run a big dragon as another win condition, aside from burn to the face. I could even see this being run in every style of Feln deck. Fetching Black Sky Harbinger is pretty powerful. Felnscar might have a bit more trouble fitting this in with the influence requirement, but they might be able to pull it off since they run Wisdom of the Elders as well. If they can, then obviously they can activate this card more often than just Feln alone, since they have more access to direct damage with fire cards. I was hoping this thing couldn't grab Champion of Cunning because it's a conditional flyer, but units can gain stats and abilities no matter what zone they're in. So we'll ultimately see once we finally get to play with the card, but I'm positive you can fetch him out if you've met the influence requirements. So the next card I'll be talking about is Cloudsnake Breeder. This is a 2-power 2/1, requiring 2 primal influence to play. It has Spark. When Spark's activated, you play a 1/2 Cloudsnake Hatchling with flying. I just want to say that the card art is up there as far as my favorites from this set so far. It's not as cool as Spirit Guide, but she just looks so maniacal. It reminds me of the Wicked Witch of the West from The Wizard of Oz or the Cat Lady from The Simpsons. I hope it's a she. It looks like it. Anyway, so this card is a decent way to flood the board early on. It might be kind of tough to trigger the Spark effect if you're looking to drop this on curve though. Because of that, there might not be that many decks that can take advantage of the effect. I think only aggressive decks want this card, specifically ones that run a bunch of 1-drops. Skycrag aggro fits the bill once again, but again that's no surprise since Spark is their mechanic. Now this could replace Whispering Wind, and I'm sure people are going to try this in Huru Flyers, but honestly I think that deck needs another good 1-drop or 2 for it to work, preferably in Primal since District Infantry, while it doesn't fly, is still okay. Although Crownwatch Squire could be the go-to instead. This could even be good in Found Tempo decks if they make a comeback. We'll see. Next card on the list is Groundbreaker. This is a 4-power 3/6, requiring 3 fire influence to play. If Spark is activated, it gains double damage. The enemy player can't gain health. Now, I do want to mention that Scarlash stated that the second part of the text where the enemy player can't gain health, that happens regardless. That doesn't rely on Spark to be activated. So Groundbreaker will always have the ability, that ability. The only ability that you need that needs to be activated is double damage from Spark. So this has a lot of potential in a bunch of different decks. It beats Sandstorm Titan in combat once you get Spark activated. It has so much health, which is not normal for fire units. It's got anti-health text regardless if Spark is activated or not. I love this card. It's good with Kayla's favor since that's just a card you generally want to play anyway. Most hard removal gets it, but it does dodge Vanquish, and only the bigger burn spells like Obliterate actually kill it. Now the more I think about it, the more I want to use this in that Skycrag spell heavy deck I keep mentioning. So if burn is the plan, then the card text is super useful, and having a repeatable source of 6 damage sounds really good. Mono fire decks definitely want this. Stone Scar decks might even want this, as I think it honestly competes with Impending Doom. Rakano should probably give this a shot too. It is the first 4-drop unit in that color combination that is actually good on its own. The triple fire influence cost is definitely heavy, but if you can put it down and plate it up on turn 5, that's insane, even if you don't activate Spark. But this thing can carry any equipment well post Spark, even an Elder's Feather. The more go-wide Rakano decks should be trying this out as well, since they have no 4-cost card they can play at the moment. Next on the list is Waystone Infuser. This is a 5-power 2/6, requiring double time influence to play. it has warp, and your power cards have warp when this is in play. So I'd like to point out that I was the first person to guess the stat line right when Loco Pojo spoiled this card on stream and hinted it was a stat line that wasn't an Eternal yet. This is a tough one to evaluate as far as how good this is, though. At least with what we know of the current cards in the next set so far. So we do have another Magic the Gathering counterpart for Eternal, though Infuser is definitely not as good. This is very powerful with Cambrai Emissary, since this allows you to play 2 power cards per turn more consistently. We also have to keep in mind that Infuser itself has warp, which has merit. I'm still not sure how powerful this card is overall, though. There is a world where this prevents you from flooding out when you get towards the late game, so you can keep drawing gas as long as you use the warp off of your power cards. But there are also other worlds where, as a 5-drop, this card is underwhelming, and there might not be a late game to get to. Of course, all of that is matchup dependent, and because of that, I think the type of metagame we have will ultimately define if this card sees play or not. That is the case for most cards, but I think the effect Infuser has makes it especially true for her. Aside from the obvious applications in Cambrai, I don't know where else this would be a good fit. Even in Cambrai, this somewhat competes with Martial Ironthorn. Not so much because of Ironthorn's ability, but just because of the fact that he also costs 5. I could see Infuser complementing Ironthorn, though. This also has application in Chalice control decks, since their units are all dorks anyway, and Infuser helps you cycle even more. Maybe if Praxis ends up getting support for an Empower Shell or something else that benefits from running through your deck via warp power cards, they could take advantage of this card. Same deal for Elysian. Otherwise, there's no reason to play this over Surso, or even to complement Surso. Maybe some Time Justice Primal Empower deck could be a thing. Maybe some combo deck that abuses warp. Regardless, 6th health is tough to deal with, if nothing else. Sandstorm Titan doesn't kill her on its own. The spot removal in Shadow and Obliterate nail her, which is a blowout if the opposing deck relies on tempo and power efficiency to win, because that kind of negates the card advantage you get from warp. She dodges all the other popular spot removal cards, though, and Permafrost doesn't negate her card text. I'll take a wait-and-see approach on this one. Let's see what the rest of the set gives us. Next card on the list is Cabal Slasher. This is a 3-power 1/3, requiring 1 time influence to play. It has Life Force. It gains attack equal to the health that you gain. So I originally saw potential in this card for Constructed, but the more I think about it, the more I feel like this is going to be better in Draft. Most of the cards we have that gain life aren't Constructed playable. If Lethrai Falchion finds a way into some Constructed decks, this unit might be a decent card, since you can make a potential 10-4 by the end of turn 4. Though I guess Healer's Cloak would be the better choice if this ends up in a Xenon deck, especially since Life Force is Xenon's mechanic. It combos with Spirit Guide if you want this card to be self-sufficient in maybe an Argenport deck. Still dies to Annihilate no matter what. Dies to Suffocate and Torch when it's not buffed, and eventually dies to Vanquish when it is buffed. And the base stat line it's underpowered for a 3-drop. There's just better units you can find in any faction that would be paired with Shadow that are good on their own. You could just run this card along with good cards with incidental life gain and hope for a big payoff in a future turn, but this card not buffing its own health will ultimately hold it back, I feel. This will really need help from future cards in this set if it's going to be constructed viable. Otherwise, this will end up being a draft pick, and I think it even faces competition there. Next card on the list is Blood Call Invocation. This is a 2-power spell requiring 1 time influence and 1 shadow influence to play. It has Life Force. You play a Restless Radiant with attack and health equal to the health you gain this turn. So we have the spell version of Bloodcall Invoker, which was leaked earlier. The biggest advantage of playing this over Invoker is the cost. Now, again, there aren't a ton of good ways to gain life with the current crop of cards we have, and the current Omens cards we know about. But this doesn't have to be played early. It is easy enough to cast late game. I think it will fit decks that don't really need to play on curve, as opposed to Invoker, where I think you have to have some semblance of a curve when dropping him down, because it's very hard to play Invoker and still have enough power to play your other good card that gains you a significant amount of life in the same turn, if you want your token to have some impact. All this being said though, with this card being a spell, you only get one chance to make a token. So you are going to have to play this the same turn you gain a bunch of life. And we don't have many good cards with burst healing. This being in Xenon could restrict it further, unless you try to go time Justice Shadow to fit in Combrei Healer or maybe even Spirit Guide. Otherwise, you're restricted to Lumen Defender, Healer's Cloak, and Umbran Reaper. Amethyst Monument could be decent as well. It will depend on what you want your deck to do, but I don't think a more aggressive deck would want this card. So stuff like Umbran Reaper, Lethrai Falchion, and Lurking Sanguar might not be too great with this card. Now this could also work in that Scream deck I mentioned in my last preview video. It is a turn 6 play with this card, but at least you don't have to worry about Invoker getting removed or silenced. Maybe that deck runs both. We'll have to see if the Blood Call cards even combo with Haunting Scream, Sauropod Wrangler, and Umbran Reaper. But I'm hoping there will be enough support in the new set to make a decent Xenon Life Force control deck. And I think this gets played alongside Blood Call Invoker in something like that. We'll see. The last card I'll be talking about is Beckoning Lumen. This is a 5-power 6/4, requiring double time influence to play. It has Life Force. At the end of your turn, if you gained health, draw a card. So this got spoiled on Sunday, which I was not expecting at all because we didn't get any cards spoiled last weekend. This, in my opinion, is the best Life Force card spoiled so far. Well, along with Blood Call Invoker. She is absolutely insane. There are so many cards you see in Constructed that have incidental life gain. Cards like Temple Scribe, Combrei Healer, Vara's Favor, and even Lumen Defender and Healer's Cloak to a lesser extent. Now, a 5-power 6/4 is almost, but not quite, the ideal stat line. If she was a 5/5, that might have blown the top off as far as how good this card is. The 4 health still makes her vulnerable to cards like Lightning Strike and Auric Runehammer, and she barely dodges Torch, meaning you might not want to block with her against anything playing fire if you need her effect. Most of the popular hard removal gets her too. She only dodges Suffocate. Since you'd like to get immediate value with a card like this, a lot of people initially compared her to Mystic Ascendant. Even though she comes down faster, it's a bit tougher to proc her ability, so she won't be replacing Ascendant. If you really want to go all in on having a heal effect every turn, you'd be looking into cards like Stronghold's Visage, Amaranth Camel, or maybe even Sanctuary Priest. I don't know about that last one though. Between Combrei, Xenon, and maybe even 3-color decks like TJP Control, I definitely think she finds a home somewhere. I will be shocked if this card doesn't see play in Constructed. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on the spoilers from the upcoming Omens of the Past set that we got this past week. Again, we will probably either be seeing new cards spoiled a few hours from the time of this video, or they may be here already. I hope I got some gears turning by reviewing these. If you liked the video, feel free to hit the like button. If you didn't, then feel free to dislike it, but let me know in the comment section why you didn't. I always appreciate feedback as long as it's constructive. I've got other Eternal content on this channel as well, like the Eternal Era series, if you guys want to look at the misplays I make with certain decks and learn from them. And I actually just put up a new episode this past Friday. There's other stuff too. Discussions on what I've learned playing certain archetypes, some tournament matches, some ladder highlights, even the best runs I've done in the new event mode that got introduced. So feel free to look around. Anyway, thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this. And I'll see you all soon. Take care.